Buonasera, buonasera a tutti. Eccoci di nuovo alla nostra live del giovedì sera. I'm gonna switch to English immediately because tonight we have an international guest, so this live will be in English language, and as usual we will re-upload it on YouTube with Italian subtitles in a couple of weeks. And I'm very happy to introduce you our guest tonight, which is Friedrich Wagner. I'm not sure if the title is professor or doctor.
Don't worry.
And of course, it's not unlikely that many people in our public do not know the name, but if you are in the nuclear field, you should know the name. He's the director emeritus of the Max Planck Institute for Plasma Physics, which is one of the leading institutions in fusion research in Europe and actually worldwide. And so yes, we have a person who is very knowledgeable, definitely in the field of fusion research. However, this will not be our first topic tonight, because being German, Wagner also witnessed firsthand the Energiewende, the German energy transition, and he also worked a lot with renewable energies. So those are the issues that we will talk about tonight, at least in the first part. And then, of course, I'm expecting questions on fusion research to come up. Welcome, Friedrich.
Okay. Thank you.
So I'm gonna just start with a very straightforward question. You worked a lot with fusion energy, and you worked a lot with renewables. Can you just quickly describe your research in the different fields to our public?
Okay, Luca, let me first thank you for your introduction and for the chance and possibility that I show up here. It's rather late for me. The thing is that I have worked in fusion, but I'm retired. But I still have, luckily, connections to my institute, which was, or is the Max Planck Institute. And we can talk about in more detail about what I contributed. So I worked first on tokamaks. Tokamak you probably know, because in Italy you operated tokamaks and you are about to build a new one, a big one. And then I later changed to the other toroidal configuration, which is called Stellarator. And I worked for Stellarators in the States for a while. I was guest scientist at a large tokamak device in Princeton. Okay, and doing now research in the environmental or in the environment of renewables is a project which I developed after having retired. The thing is that in Germany we had and still have, and this will be renewed now, I think, a tremendous development of renewable energies, so onshore wind, offshore wind, and photovoltaic power. And under these circumstances, I asked myself, facing, let me say, this tremendous development, whether it is still justified to develop fusion energy. Do we, in the future, need it or not? And I studied then the background, the literature, and I recognized that there is a mix, I would say, between research and lobbyism. And it was pretty difficult to separate. Then I found out I better do the thing myself and started, let me say now, to analyze what we are doing in Germany and to project this into further stages of development, specifically then, let me say, the year 2050 or so. Now it is for Germany 2045, where we ultimately would like to be CO2 free in our emission. And well, being a trained scientist, of course, the most obvious thing was that I do my research. And then if something emerges and I have some outcome, something to communicate, then I published. So I'm still doing my publications. I had a very nice cooperation in Italy, because there is in Varenna, on Lake Como, a biannual conference, or a summer school, sorry, not a conference, a summer school, dealing with all energy technologies. And for a long time, I was a partner of the director there, Professor Luigi Cifarelli from Bologna University. We had the last summer school last year, and the next one I think will be 2023. So this was another involvement in energy issues. And then, of course, I was invited to give talks at colloquia or so. And of course, this is all rather important, that you don't sit in your room and think about things, but that you communicate them, because science requires, let me say, this feedback from the outside, as we all know. Science is not, there's not a new piece of science when somebody recognizes he now understands something new, but he has to communicate and publish the whole thing. Then he has contributed, let me say, with a piece of science. So this is sort of my situation. I'm doing this. I enjoy dealing with numbers, so I continue doing these calculations. And Germany, of course, is a laboratory for the involvement or the development towards renewable energies. So we are getting interesting data and interesting facts. And meanwhile, we are now in a situation where the whole thing becomes critical. And we will see whether the whole thing works or has problems. And I'm, well, it depends now on your questions, whether I should continue there discussing, let me say, just my attitude, or whether we go into more technical or substantial issues. So I stop at the moment. I leave it to you, Luca.
Well, I was just about to delve on this, honestly, in the sense that German energy policy have been praised a lot in the past 10 years. If you read international newspaper, Germany was usually described as a climate leader because of what you said, because they pushed heavily on renewable development, and it actually helped the development of renewable energies also in other countries, because Germany invested so much money and it made the technology progress and become cheaper because of efficiency and so on. However, the music changed recently, because after the start of the war in Ukraine, a lot of people realized that Germany is actually highly dependent on Russian gas, and also the international media that used to praise Germany started to criticizing it. I was reading an article on the Telegraph last week, which was very, very harsh words against the current German leadership, and also the previous German leadership, namely former Chancellor Gerhard Schröder, which is currently in Gazprom board. So I would like to ask you straightforward, what's your take on the German Energiewende, both scientifically and politically?
Okay, so I think this is a big umbrella which you opened now with many issues. So the first thing is, you said Germany was praised because of its energy policy, and when one looked into international journals and so on, this was not always the case. When you look into the Wall Street Journal, they said the energy policy of Germany is the dumbest energy policy on the world. So they were critical, and I think this was a statement which is 2 or 3 years ago or so. Then when you say Germany was praised because of its environmental policy, just a word of caution. When you think about the total greenhouse gas emission of Germany, or let me say break it down to the CO2 emission for electricity generation or so, we are pretty bad. And when you think about the 8 million people, so you better divide it and give the figures per capita, then again, Germany is pretty bad. So we are by far, let me say, in any ideal form, models for others. You are correct that the initiative starting photovoltaic and wind energy in Germany had an impact on the international development. Of course, with windmills, we have to for sure share this with Denmark, who were pioneers in this field. And with photovoltaic power, of course, we strongly depend on the industrialization of this production line of China. But nevertheless, I think indeed Germany was one of the first to consider to change the thermal power production, which they now have, nuclear plus fossil, into renewables. And then at the end, you mentioned, let me say, the consequences now, or the impact of the whole development, because we have this gas problem, because of this horrible war, and the role of our former chancellor. I would say, let me say, the role of the former chancellor at the moment we can leave out, because this is not a technical issue. This is, of course, the issue Germany has to deal with, specifically his party has to deal with, and but this doesn't help us at the moment at all. Now, when we think about, let me say, this overall effort to renewable energies, then now this is a lengthy, I'm not prepared to give a talk, so you must interrupt, please, so that the whole thing is a little bit more vivid. But just let me say, we first have to think about the possibilities. What are the options mankind has in the future for clean energy generation? And this is limited. If one wants to continue with fossil fuels, then it is necessary to develop CCS, so carbon capture and sequestration. You know what I'm talking about, of course.
Yes, I know. And I also know that it's very unlikely for carbon capture and sequestration to be an option in a free market economy, because nobody is going to pay to store CO2 underground. It's likely that someone will pay to capture CO2 and make something out of it that you can sell. Yes. I can trust that to happen, but nobody's going to pay money just to sequestrate CO2 and put it underground with no income whatsoever.
Okay, big issue. In so far, and I'm not an economist, but you're starting to have a discussion, how will the future energy supply be organized in a close to the market? To what extent do the market rules and laws still play a role there? And we recognize, of course, for example, in Germany, that this is not the situation, because our politics is not technology free. It is open, or let me say technology open. That's what I mean. Technologies are excluded. And this is, of course, already, let me say, a modification of the market. And there are many, many other things. When one thinks about, let me say, what one has to develop in terms of electrolyzers or whatsoever, it is very difficult to see, let me say, how these things will be organized on the market basis, in the market as we know it up to now. But this is another topic. Let's come back to this later. Let me just continue now with these options which we have for future CO2-free generation. So in principle, it is fossil fuels plus CCS. The CCS, of course, is a market issue, as you point out, but we should be aware that, for example, in a much smaller scale, this is operated in Norway since the beginning of the 90s. Because in Norway, they have the law that the CO2 which they get along with the methane and the oil they have, their CO2 is developed in these processes because CO2 is embedded there, that they cannot simply put it into the atmosphere, but they have to put it underground. So there's, for example, the Schleuter field, which is a CCS field. Of course, they combine it with pressing CO2 underground, leave it there, but also they put the pressure onto the remaining oil and evacuate the oil. So two things fall on top of each other, and both are useful in this sense. But nevertheless, I also see that CCS is a problem, and in Germany specifically, we don't do any research. We have many underground voids and openings where in principle one could store them, but it is illegal in most of our states. Okay, but this is one. The other thing, of course, is then nuclear energy in its various forms. I don't have to go into the detail at the moment there. Then we have in the future fusion, but fusion will not be able to penetrate the market only in the second half, I would say rather deeply in the second half of the century. And then we have the renewable energy forms. We have then wind, photovoltaic, biomass, maybe geothermal power. This is something which plays in Europe a role in Italy. Environmental power. So that's it. We don't have more, I would say. So there are not so many options. And therefore, I'm not critical in the sense that Germany tries to go into renewable energies because there is no way out. We will ultimately need them. I'm very critical that we don't continue with nuclear power, because we had a tremendously good industry for nuclear power. And specifically, I'm very critical that we did not continue research in these fields. So with respect to nuclear energy, we only do research into security. And I'm sure this will now be stopped this year because the last thing is switched off. And we are doing research into waste storage. That's it. But we do not do any research, let me say, in new generation 4 concepts or other concepts. And I think this is something our government has to be blamed. So it is specifically for the research case. And when I say it is unavoidable that we will in the future utilize renewable energies, this has ultimately to do with the fact that we don't have many options. Fusion will give an option, but not now, and not in the time frame we are discussing, 2050 or so. And when we now look into Germany as a laboratory for this, are we doing well there? Then a lot of things are stagnating. Because also, I mean the developments. How many gigawatts do we install a year? You can actually always interrupt me, Luca.
Yeah, I was actually literally about to ask you this question. Germany pushed strongly on renewables in the last 10 years, let's say, and they installed a lot of renewable power. Currently, if the wind blew in all Germany and the sun was shining in all Germany, Germany could generate more renewable power that it actually needs.
Yeah.
Even at peak hours, you have something like 130 gigawatts of installed renewable capacity, not counting biomass and hydro. And to the point that there are some Sundays in which, of course, on Sundays people don't work, so the energy needs are lower and prices go even negative, which means that Germany is paying neighboring countries to take some of its energy, or it's paying some industries to turn on some machines to consume energy because you produce so much with renewables. However, this was a big economical effort from Germany, because the total amount invested, I think, rounds up to 580 billions euros. I mean, not all of them have been spent. They have been put to budget.
But nevertheless.
But emissions have lowered, indeed, a little. But right now, it doesn't seem there's no progress anymore. Starting from you reached the bottom peak in 2020, which of course the pandemic helped, and then emission rose again in 2021, and in 2022 and 2023, German environment minister already said that climate target will be missed. And of course, this has to do with the fact that energy storage is still an issue. While renewable energies developed a lot and are mature technologies, I believe that storage is not yet.
Yes. Okay, so again, many technical issues. So let storage out at the moment. Maybe we discuss it a little bit later. Just the situation now with respect how we are setting up and building our electricity. We are talking at the moment only about electricity, not about end energy use. So the figure for electricity in Germany is that something like 520 terawatt hours we consume. We produce more, 600 terawatt hours, maybe even beyond. But some of this goes into industry directly and some is lost. So we consume something like 520. The hydroelectricity part is minute, is something like 20 terawatt hours from the whole thing. And does not contribute so much and cannot be expanded in Germany. Then we have biomass. You mentioned biomass. Biomass in electricity. So this is biogas, and this is something like 45 or so terawatt hours. So when we withdraw this, then we have something like 450 terawatt hours to be produced by other technologies. And this up to now is mostly the base load, which is lignite, burning lignite. and then coal, which is imported, larger part from Russia, and then gas, and then the renewable energies. And with renewable energies, of course, they change from year to year. So 2020, we had a very high wind year. 2021 not, was the opposite, a very low wind year. The difference is something in the generation, something like 10% or something like this. So it is quite substantial. We have now, and you mentioned the figures, when I add it up, we have something like, I think, 60 gigawatt photovoltaic power. We have something like close to this, 55 gigawatt onshore wind, and something like 8 gigawatt offshore wind. Now we can add it up. It is substantially more than our peak load is. The peak load is something like 80 gigawatt in Germany. And as I said, during the night and the weekend, it is lower. So this oscillates between 40 and 80 gigawatt. But when you have, let me say, when we look into onshore wind, and we say there we have something like 55 or 60 gigawatt power, of course, you must look at the average power, because as we all know, it is produced intermittently. So it has tremendous peaks, and in between, there is no wind and no production, irrespective of the power which we have installed. So we have to look into the average value. And for this purpose, one easy figure is the full load hours. So one has to ultimately, let me say, look into the installed power, but one has to involve the full load hour or the capacity factor. So how much of the capacity is actually used? So when you have, let me say, 60 gigawatt and you have a harvest of something like 60 terawatt hours or so, you can calculate from these figures the effective time where the full installation is used. And these figures are low for Germany because we are not specifically sunny and we are not specifically windy. So these figures are something like 1,000 out of 8,760 hours a year. The effective use of photovoltaic power is 1,000. So it's something like 12% or so, 1,000 hours. Onshore wind is something like 1,700, 1,800 hours. So one has to involve those things. And therefore, I think we had sort of a short period, and it must have been a weekend where indeed the renewables balanced the full load. But when you look, let me say, over the year or something like this, we specifically need nuclear power, lignite power for base loads, and then we need coal and gas just now to produce the balancing power to meet the load. And we are still something like 60% or so away from the case that the renewable energies produce as much as we actually need. And now your issue about the storage comes in. So I think one has to you interrupt me, please, because otherwise I continue talking when you don't like it.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I'm following everything you're saying, and it's completely. I mean, most of my viewers actually already had a lot of these informations because we cover Germany a lot.
Okay, so then let me discuss then this other issue which you brought up, the negative prices. The negative prices, let me say, are a combined effect of producing renewable energy and producing thermal energy. Because the situation is that in the morning, photovoltaic goes up tremendously. Because now we have installed something like 60 gigawatts. So we are pretty close, let me say, on our weekend to overshoot in principle the need. So this goes up, 8 hours later or so, it goes down again. So there is a tremendous dynamics in the load, in the grid at the end. And the consequence is that in the night, of course, we need thermal power. And the thermal power is not needed when photovoltaic is there. But when photovoltaic goes away again because of sunset, then we would need it again. And the consequence is that these power stations cannot be switched off to zero and then switched on again. So they go down to a certain steady state level. And now Germany has this mixed production of thermal power on a steady state level, and now photovoltaic comes. And this produces, let me say, situations where we are producing more than we need. And then we export. And Germany is now, in the last years, competing with France in terms of amount of electricity with it, which is exported. So we are...
Actually, I believe that Germany exported more electricity than France, except that, of course, France is a bigger net exporter, because Germany also imports in ours.
Sorry, yes, I'm talking about net export. So Germany, let me say 2018, 2019, exported something like 50 terawatt hours. And this is what France is also exporting. So this is very comparable. Now, in the last year, I think the net export, always talking about the net export, is somewhat reduced. I think one is learning this circumstance of not being able to fully switch off thermal power stations when photovoltaic comes. But this is a principal problem that, let me say, when photovoltaic power comes up, and the potential in all countries and also even in Germany is high, that at the end we can, let me say, set up something like 300, 400 gigawatt photovoltaic power. But how to handle this power is something which is, to my taste, not discussed sufficiently, because this is a hardcore technical issue. How do you now switch on the sinks of your electricity, the consumers of your electricity?
And I think it also has to deal with the fossil fuel of choice, because brown coal in general, whether it's brown or black, has a higher ramp-up time.
Yes.
So,
yes.
So the more you have intermittent renewables, the more the grid demands for faster switches. And
Yes.
faster switches are better handled with gas than coal.
You're absolutely correct. Nevertheless, it is impossible with lignite. We agree. It is possible with nuclear power. In France, there was a very detailed study that nuclear power will be able to cope with the dynamics of photovoltaic power in a shorthand. And in Germany, we use coal because this is cheaper than gas. So coal is doing, if you want, a base load of regulation. And then on top of this is gas. And then, of course, in the future, before the Ukrainian war, the idea was that Germany moves out of coal-burning power stations. And the idea was originally to do this till 2038. This was now, for some political circles, not ambitious enough. Now they want to do it earlier, faster, 2030, for example, and replace it by gas. And this is probably one of the reasons why the second pipeline has been established. Because
the Nord Stream 2.
Because the thing is that up to now, we have something still working in Germany, something like 30 gigawatt or 28 gigawatt of gas power stations, but we would need to regulate fully the renewable energies when they are further developed, something like 20 to 40 additional gigawatt gas-burning power stations.
Well, that's a lot of new gas power stations, and,
yes, and this is just, let me say, one critical element that one would need these backup systems now, because nothing else is there, no storage is there, no hydrogen is there, so we would need this backup system. And when people are talking about the cheap electricity prices of wind and photovoltaic power, saying the sun doesn't send us a bill or so, they are not including at all, let me say, that we need backup systems.
Yes, and sometimes you also have to reward these backup systems only because they exist, only for the fact that they exist. So you create a parallel market, which is called capacity market. I'm not explaining to you; I'm explaining to the viewers, of course.
But
so you have to.
It closes the loop to what you said before. What is on the market basis in this development? Because you mentioned already, one would need the capacity market, so one needs a new element in the whole business, because now you are getting money not because you sell electricity, because of your readiness to sell electricity. Sorry, I interrupted you. Maybe you should continue.
No, it's. I was just saying that you have to reward what these gas-fired plants, which are called backup plants or peaker plants, just because they exist, because they operate for a very for a low up. They have a low operational uptime, but you still need to pay the people that work there. And you have to reward the investor who built the plant for you to have there in case of need. So you create a capacity market and reward those plants, and the money of this capacity market has to be paid somewhere. So yes, the sun doesn't send you a bill, but you have to pay the backup plant, which will send you a bill, and it's just gonna add to in your energy bill. You will pay very little for electricity, but you have a very you have a higher bar on top of that, which is like taxes and other reward mechanism for gas-fired plants. We have the same situation in Italy. Our plan is also exclude nuclear and is aimed at sort of 100% renewables, but we actually scheduled like 48 new gas-fired power plants just for peak needs, peak load, and those will be repaid and rewarded in the capacity market.
Yes. But if one wants to go in this direction, and this brings us back to the discussion, how many options do we have? Then I think we have to go through this. And the consequence, of course, is tremendous technology development, which costs a lot of money. You mentioned 500-something billion euros for the renewable energy program of Germany. I would say, let me say, it is something like maybe 200-250 billion euros which have been invested up to now to what we have.
Yes.
But we are only at the foot of the whole development. So the installations are extremely costly. Then we need additional grids, and then we need additional consumers, for example, electrolyzers. And this brings us all back to the question, for example, which I recently studied, how much hydrogen, for example, can Germany nationally produce? How does this fit into the whole picture? How much electricity can we produce, and so on? And then the question, let me say, the next question is, can we save so much that we can live with what we produce nationally? Of course, the answer is a crying no, not impossible. Germany will, like in the past, be an importer. But we probably have to be an importer of electricity, not only hydrogen. We will be an importer of both. And when you ask about importing electricity directly, where do you get this? Not from Europe. And these are, let me say now again, the questions, how renewable energies distributed out of our Europe helps us to cooperate under the circumstances. And this is all not simple. And these are the things which I'm interested in and which I analyze.
So do you believe there is a future in which Germany can obtain its electricity from renewables only without the need of fossil fuels backup?
So one has to discriminate here between, let me say, the build-up period and the final state of development. In the build-up period, for example, the situation up to now, for example, for Germany, and still, let me say, for doubling what we are having now, we cannot use storage because we don't overproduce. For storage, you need a production which is more than what, let me say, your basic electricity demand is. As I mentioned, we now require 520 terawatt hours, something like this. In the future, we would like to have electric cars. They add up something like 100 terawatt hours. Then the idea is that we change our heating systems away from oil and gas, and that we should use heat pumps. They need again electricity, something I don't know exactly, maybe 80 terawatt hours. So the electricity demand will strongly increase. And what we now can produce, first is unclear, because so it is unclear how much we need in the future. It is unclear how much we can produce, and this is not because of the weather variability from year to year. It is the question, what is the potential? How much space is available for onshore wind? How much space is available, let me say, in the North Sea of the German part there, and how much photovoltaic power can we set up? So now the saying in Germany is we can utilize 2% of our land for onshore wind. Under these circumstances, maybe we can set up, and I'm quoting now figures from others, something like 145, 150 gigawatt onshore wind. Then
2% of Germany might seem like the percentage number is small, but 2% of Germany is like several, I believe, some thousands of square kilometers.
Yes, the German area is, I think, something like 350,000 square kilometers. Now you are younger than I am. You can do the calculation quicker than I am. How much 2% is, but of course it's a lot of land. Yes,
it's 14,000 square kilometers.
Excellent. I understand you are a theoretician, so you can very quickly with your mind. Okay, have you ever been to northern Germany?
Bremen is the northest I have been in Germany.
Okay, did you go there maybe by car or by train?
Train.
Okay, then you went through areas which are highly occupied by windmills, tremendous farms. Did you see any of those? So these are.
I remember seeing windmills. I haven't actually paid attention to how many there were. It was about 10 years ago. I was like having a trip with friends in Amsterdam and West Germany.
Okay, but never mind. So the situation is indeed that there are areas which are densely packed with wind parks. And this is, of course, a problem for many people. But nevertheless, let's just go through, let me say, the situation. What is the political emphasis, or the goal is that we utilize 2% of our space for onshore. And this would add up to something like 145 or 150 gigawatts or so. Other people will quote other numbers. Offshore wind is something like 60, maybe 70 gigawatts, and photovoltaic is open. When we have now a problem with the energy, then people tend to add photovoltaic power. And then the saying is we have the roofs, but we also in the future use the side walls, and then we have tremendous amounts. And what is not discussed, I think, is, as I mentioned before, the photovoltaic power increases horribly. And who can cope with this? First thing. The second thing, of course, is what does it do to you in winter? Because in winter you only get, let me say, 10% of what you get in July and August.
Yeah.
And now again, what you mentioned at the beginning, storage enters. But I would say, let me say, when you set up these tremendous amounts, 150 onshore, 70 offshore, and maybe 400 gigawatt photovoltaic power, that under these circumstances, you probably, to a large extent, can fulfill the electricity demand, but you are not able to go beyond this. So when you think about, you can fulfill the electricity demand in the sense that you have a lot of surplus production, and then you turn this into hydrogen and turn this into secondary electricity, and then you close the electricity loop. You can ask with the German potential how much electricity actually you can in this way produce. And then you learn you can produce something like maybe, these are now my calculations, maybe something like 700 terawatt hours. And this is by far not what we need. We need more than 1,000 terawatt hours electricity for example, our chemical industry. When they would like to decarbonize fully, then they quote something like more than 600 terawatt hours for themselves, only for chemical industry.
Whoa, that's a lot.
This is a lot, and this is.
I was not expecting this figure.
This is on top what anyway we would need for mobility and for light, and in the future for digitization and for Industry 4.0 and so on and so on. So we will not be able to make both ends meet. So we will be an extremely importer, but now not for easily accessible fossil fuel, but for hydrogen or ammoniac or electricity directly. And this will also be the concern of our neighbors when you think about electricity.
Well,
yeah, sorry.
Many of your neighbors are building nuclear plants, so there is they might have energy to sell you because
Yeah, but this is not so simple either, because first, when you think about the time frame, so we now have France, which produces something like 400 terawatt hours electricity, and they have something like 55, 58 nuclear power stations, but they are getting old. The power stations are getting old, and I think this is a serious problem. But nevertheless, of course, when they get the act together in France, then France will be able, because they have plans, let me say, to develop nuclear power. They have better boundary conditions to set up renewable energies than Germany has. They are sunnier, they have a long coast of the Atlantic, so they are better off. And then anyway, they have more land for the population density is lower, and therefore maybe there's more tolerance for onshore wind. In Germany, we don't have any tolerance for onshore wind any longer, and I understand people fully there. So France has better possibilities for renewable energies, and then on top of this, they can produce something like 400 terawatt hours from nuclear power. So this is a tremendous asset, which we only have in this country, in Europe. Maybe then in UK it will be similar, because they continue with nuclear power, and then they also have good boundary conditions for renewables, specifically for renewables. They will be better off.
Macron actually was re-elected by promising a massive renewable expansion, as well as a renewal of the nuclear fleet and some new reactor building. I also believe that right before the end of his previous term, Macron passed a bill which basically forbids nuclear plants to be closed if not for safety reasons, meaning that when they reaches the age term, unless they are unsafe to operate, they can continue to operate if it's regardless of age, which I believe will extend the life of several French plants up to 2035 and beyond.
Yeah, but still we must face the fact that you say that there are material issues, and they are recognizable also there. So I think France indeed needs an aggressive program to renew their park, the nuclear energy park. No doubt.
Okay. Yes, there's gonna be. Well, they also are considering new builds. They say they will start at least 6 new reactors before the end of the 20s, and possibly 8 more in the following decade, and also an SMR research program. And because the new reactors are 1600 megawatts, it's likely that they will, like, each reactor can replace 2 of the oldest ones. So I'm expecting France will keep being reliant on nuclear, and also the UK announced a massive nuclear energy expansion, like Boris Johnson just promised, 1 new reactor per year starting from 2028 onwards. And
I would, let me say, I would not trust all these figures. Nevertheless, the only meaningful policy is indeed to develop nuclear power along with renewables, because it's unavoidable that at the end we need renewables.
Yes, I mean, I'm all in favor of renewables. What I'm not in favor of is 100% renewables, which I do believe is...
This is impossible. Impossible.
Okay, well, you said it for me.
Yes, you can read hundreds of papers in Germany where people say it is possible. But I think it is impossible. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, even if it was possible, I don't think it would be sustainable. Just in terms of sheer raw materials that you would need to build that many windmills and solar modules and batteries and hydrogen, like the amount of raw material would be disgusting.
Yes.
And that's also waste that you generate, because, well, first of all this material needs to be extracted and refined, and then, like, solar panels have a life, an operational life, and so do wind turbines, and then you have to dismantle them and handle all the waste that's generated.
No, I fully agree. The IAE has done a recent study where they analyzed the material issues in connection with renewable energy. This is a very interesting report, worthwhile to read. The consequences that they are, I don't know whether they said it also, but if up to now we have sort of the age of fossil fuels, we will in the future have the age of the minerals, the rare earth minerals and all the others. because this will be the limiting factor. And this is something, of course, which we have to, I mean the Earth, we have to exploit those things. And they all have extremely negative aspects also. So the number of countries which can provide cobalt, nickel, copper is much less than the number of countries which in the past provided us with gas and coal and oil. First thing. The second thing is that these minerals have to be refined and then they are sold. And the refineries for the minerals are country-wise even more limited. Specifically, of course, as we all know, China is playing a dominant role there.
Yeah, 95% of rare earth refination.
Sorry?
China currently has 70% of rare earth reserves and controls 95% of the refineries.
Yes, so this is a major issue. And our dependence, let me say, on natural materials, which we just dig out or so, will remain with us.
And someone is asking, what do you think will happen when like in 10 years, when the first the first bunch of wind farms that Germany installed in 2010 and the following years will have to be dismantled?
Yeah. So the situation is now that we are starting these years, let me say, the end of the first set, because it's not, let me say, necessarily the technical end, but it is the end of their subsidy. And when you don't get the subsidy any longer, it is not worth operating them. So the positive element is, as you said it before, with nuclear power, that they have now 1.6 gigawatt or so, that one can repower those and place their more efficient installations. But nevertheless, we are losing quite substantial parts of the wind park, which we have. And the issue now is that the most crucial element seem to be the rotor blades. What to do with the rotor blades? And of course, the first element was just to cut them in pieces and burn them. But this is not possible because they are using material which kills every fire in the most robust stove also. So, for example, stoves which are involved in cement production and so on, they cannot handle those because the rotors become liquid and then the fire kills. It kills all the fires. So it is very simple. I never saw this. I only listened to people discussing this, for example, in our summer school. So this is a critical element. And at the moment, they don't know what to do. So they are stored somewhere. And
yeah, I've seen in the United States, they're basically piling them up in landfills.
Yes, yes. And this, I think, is the same situation in Germany. I never saw photos of those. The idea is now to grind them down and use them somewhere in street building or something like this. But whether this works and, let me say, gives a solution with duration or something like this, I don't know. But it's an issue indeed. And it comes, let me say, from a side one has not expected, of course, when one talks about renewable energies and windmills. Photovoltaic power is also the issue, of course, that critical, that it is not able at the moment to recycle the involved materials there because they are thin layer technologies, and this is all very tough and energy costly to recycle. So these are very open points. Anyway, the whole recycling, of course, is a critical element in all these processes. When you talk about the rare earth materials and all the other materials which we need for windmills, then this is, of course, and for photovoltaic power and all the switching devices and so on, this is all a critical issue, yes.
And what about biomass? I know that Germany is investing a lot of money in that too. I know that Germany is even importing wood from Estonia because you are building like wood fire plants. Am I wrong?
Yeah. So the biomass situation, I think, in Germany was connected with a lot of optimism maybe 10 years ago or so. Because people were discovering, let me say, switchgrass and all sorts of things which grow quickly. But this did not work out. And at the end, they found out that rapes is a good product which can be produced in Germany, firstly, and corn is another one. And the farmers found it more economic the income was higher when they grew rapes and corn to be used in for energy purposes. So they are producing ester and biodiesel and biogas for electricity. And the consequence was that the landscape looked yellow in the north and homogeneously corn green in the south. And this has consequences on the insect population, for example. In former days, when you did a day trip with a car, then you had to clean your windshield. And we had, like you also, our own swarm to do this, to clean it. And we had, let me say, cleaning material to get rid of the insects on the windshield. And this is not the case any longer. So you can drive and your windshield remains clean. And the consequence of this was also that the bird population went down. So there is a strong impact on biodiversity. And therefore, the biomass is limited now in Germany. There is not a fanciful, let me say, development any longer. And people are altogether rather concerned about this development. And the upshot of all this is that maybe we can continue producing biomass, which is maybe at the end gives us something like 300 terawatt hours or so. And we use up to now, as I said already, 50 terawatt hours electricity. I don't think that this will continue like this because maybe the biomass has to be used for other purposes and not for producing electricity, but I don't know exactly. So it cannot be expanded any further.
I see. I'm going to ask you a question now about the general sentiment in Germany, like people's idea. I know it's not exactly a research field for you, but you mentioned a couple of times that people are not willing to accept onshore wind farms anymore. And I've also saw some polls that showed a shift in public opinion in favor of nuclear power now, probably prompted by the energy crisis and the Ukraine war. So what do you think people want right now in Germany? I mean, what was their opinion on the energy vendor? Or
like in other countries, I think the majority thinks electricity is coming just from the plug and don't worry about anything else. The situation now, of course, changes, and the gas crisis, I think, made everybody now rather sensitive about these issues. So the situation, let me say, with the setup of the renewable energies, specifically the onshore wind, is, as we discussed it already, there are, I think, something like 1,000 local groups which are protesting against the setting up of further windmills. Up to now, indeed, they went to court, and this was a very tedious process then. It always took a couple of years to resolve the whole issue, and this delayed, of course, the ambition of the state and the ambition of investors. This will change because the legality basis has been changed by our present government, and the expectation is that now in the future, this can all be done quicker, and we can, let me say, reach our extremely ambitious goals within a couple of years, which I think is just lacks all rational for me, because setting up, let me say, something like 10 gigawatt onshore wind or 5 gigawatt, when you look at something like the world, I think, can set up something like 30 gigawatt windmills per year. When we leave China out, the rest produces something like 30, and we have the ambition to do 30% of it. So this is all mission impossible. It will not easily be possible. And whether the legal situation can be changed quickly, I also doubt, because on the other side, people have fundamental rights, and I'm sure that our constitutional court has to deal with all those issues. And I myself recognize, we discussed this, that indeed renewables, there is no way out, we will use it, but I hate to see, let me say, these tremendous forests of wind parks. The destruction of the landscape for me is tremendous. And I always painted in my life. And I also like landscape painting. And I'm sure, let me say, that the German romantic painting, or also the German romantic, let me say, poems and so on, or let me say, the Impressionism would not have been emerged and developed if we had, let me say, countrysides which look like countrysides we now have in northern Germany. So this, I think, is a critical issue. So we have to go to offshore as much as possible. Also, this is not so easily possible because you cannot pack, let me say, the space with windmills because they are cannibalizing themselves. And
yeah, you have to, each windmill have to be at a distance from the next one. The minimum distance should be 8 times the diameter of the windmill itself. That's
yes, it is an ellipse at the end because in the direction of the wind it is differently than perpendicular to the wind, to the average wind direction. But even if you obey this law, it is not sufficient because it is a very tricky issue how the wind park absorbs the kinetic energy and how the kinetic energy can flow into this disk where the wind parks are located. And the situation is that, let me say, these optimistic full load hours or capacity factors people were discussing up to now probably are not viable, are not correct or so. Okay. Sorry, I lost the thread now. What were we actually discussing?
We were talking about the fact that onshore windmills are destroying the landscape, so that prompts that causes the need to go offshore. But offshore there are other sets of issues, meaning you cannot pack the wind turbines too close to one another, and
photovoltaic issue. The power rise, and let me say the issue about winter, that in winter it doesn't help very much. And you were talking about, let me say, whether the attitude in Germany changes towards nuclear energy. There is now much more discussion in the media. And I think, let me say, the media are recognizing, at least some media are recognizing that we are getting into a problem. And I would say Germany has a severe problem. Because if we switch off the nuclear power finally and cannot go back to it, we have to go back to coal. There is no other way out. And if we now would not get the gas any longer, I think then we have a severe problem, because to set up, let me say, to develop more wind energy would mean at the end that nevertheless you have, let me say, these lull periods where you don't have any energy production and you need the gas. This was the whole philosophy up to now. We go to gas and we are building something like, we discussed it before, 20-40 gigawatt gas power stations. And if this falls away, then I don't know where we will get our energy from. Because, of course, the world is not ready to deliver hydrogen. To supply hydrogen, the hydrogen needs of Germany alone, other countries have to set up the same sort of capacity in producing hydrogen by windmills and photovoltaic power. Then they need the logistic to transport this to Germany. They need the water. Often there where the sun is, there is no water, so you need desalination or so. Many critical issues.
Yeah, I mean, we ran a couple calculations on hydrogen, and I mean, I'm sure it can have a lot of useful applications, but to have it, like to use it for energy storage, you would require a disgusting amount of it, because the efficiency of energy conversion from electricity to hydrogen and hydrogen back to electricity is actually very low. Yeah, and 30%, yes, but 30% if you do not have to transport the hydrogen anywhere or to compress it, otherwise it falls. Yeah. It can fall up to 10%, which means you have to have a lot of electrolyzers. Sure. And also this is something I've actually discussed with a professor of energy economics. You cannot build electrolyzers just to work when renewables overproduce. It would be a massive. It would be economically unfeasible. You would be building electrolyzers to work just 600 or 700 hours per year. So you would have to build you have to create more wind farms or solar farms just for electrolyzers to have at least 1,700 hours of.
I agree. Calculations myself also. I did not, of course, include in my calculations now the shipping of ammoniac or something like this overseas to Germany. When I simply stated, let me say, in our country or so, produce hydrogen there or so, then the overall efficiency, including, let me say, water the cleaning of the water transport to the site of the electrolyzer, and the compression and so on, and the storage or so, at the end, a factor of 3 is there for sure. And maybe the efficiency is even less or something like this. So it is really critical because it means at the end we have primary electricity, which is directly coming from the renewable energy sources, and we have secondary electricity, which goes through the stomach of hydrogen production. And if there's the efficiency 30%, or you say it may even be less, then the price is at least a factor of 3 or something like this higher. So we will have, let me say, a market situation where we have extreme price variations. And of course, everybody would like now to utilize, let me say, the cheap price area, where whenever this is, maybe when the sun is there or something like this. And outside this, of course, things have to continuously operate. Otherwise, industry can't work. And then they are running into a period utilizing secondary electricity, which has an extremely high price under the circumstances.
By the way, Germany already has pretty high electricity bills. I think it's like just the topping the chart with Denmark.
Yes. So for households, we have the highest electricity prices, not only in Europe, in the world. Industry situation is others. Industry, I think in Europe, Italy is actually leading. You have the highest, I think, electricity price for industry in Europe. Yes, you can make a diagram. I made this diagram a few years ago or something like this. When you plot, let me say, the electricity price against the contribution of renewables, the fraction of renewable energy, electricity generation, and then you get nearly a nice line. So they correlate.
Yeah, I think I have a similar diagram. If you just allow me to look for it, I will share the screen if you don't mind.
Do you publish your things?
No, I'm not a researcher. I don't work at university, but I deal with a lot of people who do this kind of things. So,
do we actually still have an audience, or did people go to bed?
No, we still have an audience of 100 and
oh, wonderful.
165 people roughly.
Well, I have to apologize for them.
No, as I mean, usually I have more viewers, but a lot of them are not English fluent, so we have also only the English fluent right now.
Yeah, you can understand my English easily, or whether it's a problem.
No, I can understand your English easy, but wait, where did it download my stuff? Okay.
No, but we would agree it is sort of a linear relation.
Yeah, I just want. Okay, here I have the image. I'm gonna share the screen.
Do we have any questions? Yes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yes. This is just what I also found, and you can see Denmark and Germany are competing. So this is a little bit older picture, because meanwhile the German electricity household price is larger. Yes, this is residential electricity price. Yes, that's our situation. We are now clearly beyond 30 euro cent per kilowatt hour.
Yeah, I think this is like refers to the year 2018 or 19.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, do we have any questions from the audience?
Yeah, I will now ask the audience to if they have questions for you. Ragazzi, se avete delle domande per il professor Wagner, anche sulla sua attività di ricerca in fusione, sentitevi liberi di farle adesso.
Sorry.
Yeah, I just spoke in Italian for my audience. I just told them to ask that they're free to ask questions now. One is asking, have all of Germany's nuclear reactor research projects been shut down, actually?
Yes. So Germany is still paying with national money research into waste storage and research into reactor operation safety. Nothing else. So, for example, the development of Generation 4 reactors, or the development of dual fluid reactors. This was not done with German national money, for example. The dual fluid reactor was developed in Berlin, but these guys, meanwhile, as much as I know, went to Canada.
Yeah, I know the guys from dual fluid.
I see, okay. Mm-hmm.
We are a part of the same European nuclear advocacy group.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So I will probably invite them to describe their project at some point.
Okay. When you invite them, maybe you send me. Then I switch on. If they do it in English, of course.
Yeah, we will do it in English.
I would like to join you. Okay.
I used to know a little bit of German, but it's very rusty. And
so all the other research was stopped. I remember, let me say, this period where the nuclear technology meeting was. It was a conference, and there were also professors there. And there was one professor from Dresden, and he had just one PhD student any longer. And her name was Erika. He was talking about Erika. This was his last PhD student. I think the situation may have been a little bit improved there, but as much as I know, it's mostly foreign PhD students which we have. So these are people, let me say, who go back to their country where nuclear power is developed, because, of course, in Germany it doesn't make sense to learn something which you cannot utilize at the end nationally.
Well, we do have a lot of Italians are actually graduating in nuclear engineering in Italy. Then they go work abroad. But in Italy, we still do research, even on fission. Okay. Even we don't have reactors, but we have a big research center in Brasilone.
But no national support any longer in Germany.
That's very sad.
European support or so, but no national support. And of course, I'm aware of your engineers because I have worked with many Italian engineers in fusion. Many of those people went into fusion.
Yeah. So someone is asking, what's the greatest obstacle that nuclear fusion has to face?
Okay, so I think that we say, when I look into the fusion situation, I would say of ultimate importance is this device which is built in France, ITER. I assume, let me say, your audience knows about this. This will be the first fusion reactor. And this should produce energy and power amplification of a factor of 10. And this is crucial. So there is a very clear target. And ITER is built by 7 partners and 7 different cultures, administrative cultures, put together in this project. So this is complex. So the organization of this project is really complex. And I just don't want to know what is the impact now of the war with Russia, Ukraine on ITER, because Russia is one of the partners of ITER. The hope is that ITER will start something like 2026, 27. I think the date will be updated in near future, then we know it. But the whole thing should become critical to demonstrate, let me say, for example, this power amplification around 2035 or so, because then they should operate with deuterium tritium. I don't think I have to explain this, probably this is known. Then magnetic confinement will learn whether the whole thing indeed works from the physics point of view. And the issues there are, do we have good enough thermal insulation by the magnets? Can we, despite the sufficiently high confinement, this is what I say, the thermal insulation, nevertheless get rid of the edge? Can we, let me say, utilize the edge tray, which is called diverter, and the Italian experiment has this in its name, the next one you are about
the diverter tokamak test infrascati.
Exactly. So does this indeed work and give sort of quasi-steady state conditions? So these are major physics issues. And then there are, of course, the material issues. ITER still will be built with conventional materials, more or less. It will have a variety of blankets, because the tritium, which is one fuel, tritium and deuterium, the tritium has to be built by a secondary reaction, nuclear reaction from the neutrons which we are producing out of lithium. So we are competing with lithium, but we are in fusion using lithium much more efficient by a factor of 10 to 6 or 10 to 7 than when we use it, let me say, in the environment of batteries or so.
Well, I was discussing the issue with Matteo Passoni in a conference we held together. I don't think there is a competition there, because you can use depleted batteries. Depleted batteries, lithium is chemically unuseful, but its nuclear properties are still the same. So you can use depleted battery and recycle them in lithium blankets for fusion reactors.
To make a little joke, okay. So, but nevertheless, the breeding of the tritium out of lithium has to be demonstrated by ITER that it works. And then, of course, fusion must further develop materials of low activation level. So I think, let me say, the major issues are the material issues, are a couple of selected physics issues, which will be answered by ITER. And when ITER is successful and reaches its goals, then I think, let me say, we can put fusion into national development and our future electricity generation, let me say, between, I don't know, 2060, 2070, and the end of the century. Some material issues and some physics issues.
Yeah, I think this also answers the next question, which is what's your forecast on when will we have fusion electricity?
The plans are laid out in detail, and if you would like to have an expert talk on this, then I recommended Francesco Romanelli, because he was deeply involved in Europe in developing the roadmap to fusion. And the step is now ITER, and this is essential. If ITER really has problems, political problems, for example, or at the end maybe then physics or technology problems, then this will change the way fusion goes, for sure. So the fusion community must make ITER a reality. That's a must, I would say. And then when this is successful, one can then there is also a tremendous development on the first reactor, the first true reactor, which should also then produce electricity. This is demo. Demo will of course depend on the success of ITER, but everything is prepared to go then beyond ITER. So to start, let me say, with the second phase of the design, as soon as the data from ITER are there, and demo should then start, let me say, 2050, 2060 or so. I don't know the details now of the roadmap, but this is all written down. Yeah, and this sort of gives, let me say, the time scale for fusion to be implemented at the end.
Someone is asking what were the Russians doing in ITER, which were their, I don't know if they were building some specific components or.
Yeah. The situation is that there are 7 partners, and each partner has set up a domestic agency to contribute now to ITER in hardware, not in cash, but in hardware. The amount of cash ITER can organize itself or can spend is rather small in comparison to the hardware contribution from the partners. And the partners have split up things. So the components are, for example, of course, the vessel. Then we discussed the blanket. And then, of course, the magnets. There are toroidal magnets, colloidal magnets. Then there are heating systems. Neutral beam injection, for example, is done in Padua. Then there are wave heating systems, electron cyclotron. The Russians are very good there.
What again?
This is, well, you can heat the plasma by injecting waves.
Okay.
And these waves can be in resonance with the gyrating electrons or the slower gyrating ions.
Okay, yeah. Actually, Mattia explained us.
Okay, yes, he is involved in the whole thing there. And for the electrons, you need gyrotrons, and the Russians are very good in building gyrotrons. So I'm sure that they are involved in ITER to prepare gyrotrons. But the idea was that each partner contributes to all the components and also learns how to build those components. So, for example, there is not one country which contributes with all the toroidal field coils. They're split up. Different countries ultimately build those. And I cannot say offhand what the Russians are contributing. I know that they are contributing with specific diagnostics. Particle diagnostics specifically, they contribute to electron cyclotron heating, but which hardware, whether they build their own blanket, I don't think so, but which hardware component I just am not able to tell you. But the whole thing is fragmented because each country wanted, let me say, to benefit as much as possible in all the sub-elements of the device. And all the hardware now is from Russia on site in Cadarache in France. I must admit, I also don't know. The situation is not very clear at the moment.
Next question, is Max Planck Institute running breeding blanket research?
No, not at all. Breeding blanket, so in Germany, we have a splitting of tasks. Max Planck is doing basic research. This is also the goal of Max Planck. And then we have the KIT, Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, and they are doing hardware issues. So they have, for example, superconducting groups, and they contributed with to the superconducting coils, and they for sure have, let me say, test tasks for ITER. They are, for example, specialized in building high temperature superconducting connectors. Then they have a big laboratory in developing gyrotrons. They are very advanced there. They cooperate with European industry there. So we have a splitting of tasks in the sense that Max Planck is doing basic physics, KIT is doing high-level engineering, and then we have the FZJ in Jülich. They originally had their own device, which was very successful, but they don't operate the tokamak now. But they are working, contributing at the interface between plasma and first wall, the plasma wall interaction. Maybe this term is known to the person who asked the question. And now they are also going into more material studies, utilizing plasma devices and hot cells and so on. So there's a splitting of tasks.
I see. And I have a question, actually. This is personal. What about the stellarator research? Because I know that stellarator is complicated. Like the tokamak research is probably in a more advanced stage right now, but I also know that stellarator has some unique advantages, such as it can you can have a stellarator operate as a stable plasma, while ITER, like the tokamak, must operate in pulse mode.
Yes. Yeah.
So what's the current state of art of the stellarator research?
So my institute started with fusion research in the 60s, and they more or less from the beginning operated, well, they started with a stellarator actually, and then later they added in the 70s a tokamak because of the success of tokamaks. Both systems are toroidal, so they both look as donuts. Very early in fusion research, one has learned that one needs a strong toroidal field, and the coils look just like an orange placed around the whole thing toroidally. But this is not sufficient because the magnetic field may not close upon itself when they circle the magnetic field lines around the torus, but they have to wind helically around the whole system. So you have a donut or a tire or so, and you have now helical magnetic field lines which go up and down and encircle the whole thing like in a helix. And this gives the whole thing the magnetic stiffness. And there are two ways now to produce this, what we call the pitch of this helical path, which I try to describe. And you can do this in the tokamak with a strong current flowing inside the plasma. And then to maintain the plasma state, you must maintain the current, and this inductively you cannot do continuously. Therefore, the tokamak in its original form is pulsed. You must stop the whole thing because you have a secondary winding, which is the plasma, and a primary winding in a transformer, and this comes to an end. Then you have to do the pulse, and then you have to repeat it and so on. The other way to do it is to utilize helical coils. So you have, let me say, this torus, you have the helical magnetic fields, and now you embrace the whole thing with helical coils. Then you get also this confining aspect of toroidal confinement. And we have meanwhile learned in IPP that these bulky helical coils can be replaced by modular coils, individual coils, but unlike the tokamak, they are not planar, they are shaped. Okay.
I'm sharing like the...
Okay. Okay. My pointer doesn't work, but you can see on one side the toroidal coils and the planar coils on the tokamak, on my side on the left side, and then now the modular coils of a stellarator, which are not in a plane any longer. And this picture made you say that they are complex. And of course, it's complex to build these three-dimensional structures, but they were built now for the largest stellarator device, which is Wendelstein 7X in Greifswald. Greifswald is on the Baltic Sea, 2 hours drive north of Berlin. And they work since 2015, and they have excellent confinement. This system has now been supplemented by a lot of cooling and can now demonstrate, if successful, of course, steady-state operational features of stellarators. So the physics, when you compare tokamaks and stellarators, is very interesting because on one side you have what one can call internal confinement with your current. In the other case, you have external confinement with your current in outside coils, which you have shown there. The consequence is that the stellarator is three-dimensional. This is just the outcome of Maxwell laws. It is simple, but it is a fact, unavoidably. The tokamak is two-dimensional because the toroidal coordinate is irrelevant. It is symmetric. It is continuously symmetric. The stellarator is only periodic, but not continuously symmetric. The consequence is that basic laws don't apply. For example, the conservation of angular momentum. And in a stellarator, because of the three-dimensionality, you don't have an ignorable coordinate. The consequence is that the confinement of the stellarator is bad, basically. And the consequence is that everybody jumped into tokamaks because they expected irrelevant confinement in stellarators and no reactor relevance. And it took something like 20 years of research in the Max Planck Institute and the emergence of high-power computers like the Cray. We had the first Cray in Europe, so that we could ultimately optimize stellarators. And W7X is an optimized stellarator where these deficiencies which I mentioned, which are intrinsically connected to shape, ignorable coordinate, and conservation of momentum, that this could be overcome. And this is been demonstrated in the experiment that the whole thing indeed works.
When is the experiment gonna take place?
No, it started 2015.
Okay.
It's 3 years of operation, something like this, and now it was changed. As I said, it got an upgrade so that now it can make long pulses, and they are just now in the process of commissioning the device.
Whoa.
So
that's amazing.
Start again, I think, at the end of the year or something like this. So on the 9th of August, we celebrate the restart of this device.
In August this year?
Yes, this year. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. I'm going to be excited.
No, yeah, very. I spent, as I mentioned at the beginning, I spent sort of half of my life in fusion and tokamaks, working with tokamaks, and the other half working with stellarators.
Yeah, well, I like a lot the physics of stellarator for some reasons. I don't know.
See, interesting. Okay.
Well, I'm a theoretical physicist, but for some reason I enjoy the idea that you can have it, that you can have a stable, a stable charged plasma.
No, for theoreticians, this is very appealing because you have the third degree of freedom. It's three-dimensional, as I said, and this allows you many, many different possibilities in all sorts of plasma things: stability, large-scale stability, small-scale turbulence stability, transport. Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna ask you one last question, and then I'm gonna let you go. Do you think that SMR might change the public opinion in Germany? Might prompt Germany to return to nuclear fission?
Well, this goes back to a question which I don't think I have fully answered because you wanted to know whether the public opinion changes. I think I stopped by saying the media change, obviously, because there's just more discussion. The public, I think, in a large majority is still against nuclear energy. And of course, there are tremendous political pressures because all our serious, parties are against nuclear energy. So we have now experienced a couple of sort of political Zeitenwende, as we use in Germany, times have changed. For example, our dependence on Russia is something. Afghanistan war is something. Our sudden energy sensitivity, which becomes obvious and palpable to everybody, is a tremendous change. And our political parties have to change. The first are discussing that at least we should continue operating the 3 reactors which we still have. So whether this comes at the end of the year, I don't know. I hope. Otherwise, it really would be madness, sheer madness for me. There's also the discussion whether we should not turn on those 3 which we have stopped at the end of last year. Whether this is all possible is discussed. I think the serious answers, as much as I followed it with the present 3 operational one, is positive. But of course, there are little things which play a role then at the end. Do we still have enough fuel? Do we still have people? Because of course they had employees who now, as the whole thing is stopped, want to do something different or go into retirement. Then the fuel geometry which we use in these reactors is different to what is on the market. But nevertheless, the integral answer is we could continue. And I think this is the crucial test. If at the end of the year Germany continues, then I think nuclear power will become more visible and there will be more openness. If it is stopped, I think it is really final.
Okay. Well, it makes a lot of sense from I mean, I read an article on why the German Greens are pushing so heavily against nuclear power right now, even in face of the war in Ukraine and in climate change and the fact that Germany is using a lot of very dirty coal. However, from a game theory perspective, it makes sense just because of what you said. Because if they can achieve their victory on nuclear now, it's going to be fine.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm gonna thank you again for having been our guest. You have been you explained us a lot of things. I learned a lot of things tonight. I hope my viewers did too. Well, they are thanking you for the interesting explanations. And as I said, I'm gonna try to put Italian subtitles on the video and then upload it on YouTube once it's done. It's gonna take some weeks. And now I'm gonna say goodbye to everyone and good night.
Okay, so let me just thank you and thank the unknown audience for me that they were able to spend this evening.
And you are free to come back whenever you want. Good night, everyone. I'm gonna